Welcome back to London Gritty Chronicles. I'm your host, and today we are not walking the cobblestones of London. Not yet. To understand the shadow that fell over England in 1348, we must first travel to the moment the shadow made landfall in Europe. We are going to reconstruct the most significant arrival in human history. It is October 1347. The place is the bustling port city of Messina on the island of Sicily. Imagine the sound of water lapping against wooden pylons. The air smells of salt, rotting fish and spices. The smell of money. Messina is a gateway. It is the amplifier of the Mediterranean. Ships come here from the east, heavy with silk and grain, and they leave for the west. It is a machine of commerce. But on this particular morning, the machine stops. 12 galleys appear on the horizon. These are Genoese ships. Usually, the arrival of 12 ships would be a cause for celebration. Merchants would rush to the docks. Tax collectors would sharpen their quills. Porters would prepare their backs for heavy lifting. But today, something is wrong. The chronicler, Michael of Piazza, a Franciscan friar who lived through these days, tells us what happened. He doesn't describe a triumphant entry. He describes a drift. The ships are moving sluggishly. The sails are perhaps ragged or ill-managed. They enter the harbour, but there is no shouting from the decks. There is no captain barking orders to the rowers. There is a silence that hangs over the water, heavier than the humidity. Let's pause here for a moment of language analysis. In historical storytelling, we often use the past continuous tense to set the scene. The ships were moving sluggishly. The merchants were waiting. This sets the background action. Then we use the simple past for the specific event that breaks the routine. The ships entered the harbor. Try to notice this pattern as we continue. A background state interrupted by a sudden action. The dock workers of Messina throw ropes to catch the drifting vessels. They pull the wooden hulls against the stone quay. They board the ships, expecting to find spices or perhaps news from the Crimea. Instead, they find a nightmare. Friar Michael records that the sailors were stricken to the very bones. Most of the crew were already dead. Those who were still alive were unable to stand. They had strange black swellings in their groins and armpits. These swellings, which we now call buboes, oozing blood and pus, were the size of eggs or apples. The dock workers recoil. Fear is an instant biological reaction. You don't need to understand germ theory to know that you should not touch a body that is leaking fluid. But in 1347, the economy of Messina relies on unloading ships. The confusion on the docks must have been paralyzing. Do they help the sick? Do they run? This moment, the physical contact between the healthy Sicilian porters and the dying Genoese sailors is the gateway event. It is the spark in the dry grass. But where did these ships come from? This is where our story turns into a detective investigation. The sailors whispered that they had fled from a port in the Black Sea called Caffa. They said they were escaping a mysterious reign of death. This brings us to one of the most debated and controversial events in medieval history. We often hear that the Black Death was launched into Europe. You might have read textbooks that say the Mongols used biological warfare at the Siege of Caffa. But is this true? Or is it a legend, exaggerated by fear? As critical readers of history, we must be careful with our certainty. In English, when we discuss historical events that are not 100% proven, we use hedging language. We do not say, "This happened." We say, "Evidence suggests," or "It is likely that," or "Accounts claim." Listen for these phrases. They are the tools of a sophisticated historian. They protect you from making false claims. So, the dying sailors in Messina claim they came from Caffa. To understand why 12 ships of death arrived in Sicily, we have to rewind the clock 1 year, to 1346, and travel thousands of miles east to the Crimean Peninsula. We need to stand on the walls of Caffa and look out at the army that is trying to destroy it. The city of Caffa was a Genoese trading colony. Think of it as a fortress of Italian capitalism sitting on the edge of the Mongol Empire. It was wealthy, fortified, and deeply resented by the local powers. In 1346, it was under siege by the Golden Horde, the Mongol army led by Khan Johnny Beg. This was not a normal siege. This was a clash of civilizations. Inside the walls, you had Italian merchants, secure in their stone towers, waiting for the Mongols to give up. Outside the walls, you had the greatest cavalry army in the world, frustrated and angry. But then, something invisible began to kill the besiegers. Before the arrows flew, before the walls were breached, the Mongol army began to die. A sickness swept through their camp. It killed thousands every day. The besiegers became the victims. Now, here is the critical pivot point. The standard story, the one you see in movies, is that the Khan, in a rage, ordered the bodies of his dead soldiers to be loaded onto catapults. He supposedly launched the infected corpses over the walls of Caffa to kill the Italians inside. It is a horrifying image. Bodies flying through the sky, raining death upon the city. But did it happen? In the next part, we are going to act as forensic historians. We will examine the primary source of this claim, a man named Gabriele de Mussi. We will look at his credibility. We will ask if a catapult can actually spread plague. We will use our hedging vocabulary to find the truth between the myth and the science. But back in Messina, in October 1347, none of this matters yet. The dock workers do not know about Caffa. They do not know about the Mongols. All they know is that the sailors are dying, and a strange, sweet, rotting smell is rising from the galleys. The port authorities make a decision. It is a decision made too late. They order the ships to leave. They try to push the horror back out to sea. "Get them out!" the harbour master might have shouted. But the rats have already used the ropes. The fleas have already jumped to the dock workers' tunics. The transaction is complete. The cascade has begun. In English, a cascade describes a process where one small event triggers a chain of larger events, like a waterfall tumbling down rocks. The arrival of the ships was the first drop of water. The dock workers go home to their families. They feel tired. They have a headache. They assume it is just a long day of work. They kiss their wives. They hold their children. By the time the sun sets over Messina on that first night, the city is already dead. It just hasn't stopped moving yet. The biology of the bacterium Yersinia pestis is now interacting with the sociology of a medieval port. The biology moves blindly. The sociology moves with fear. In the next episode, we will leave the doomed city of Messina for a moment and return to the crime scene at Caffa. We are going to analyze the corpse catapult theory. We will learn the vocabulary of dispute and skepticism. Was it biological warfare? Or was it simply the rats finding a way in? The ships are gone from the harbor, but the silence they brought remains. From the silent, infected docks of Messina, we travel back in time and space. We go to the source of the horror. We stand now on the high stone walls of Caffa in the year 1346. The air here does not smell of spices. It screams with the noise of war. Caffa, known today as Feodosia on the Crimean Peninsula, was a fortress. The Genoese merchants had built 2 concentric walls around their city. They felt invincible. Inside, they had water, food, and the confidence of the wealthy. Outside, the golden horde stretched as far as the eye could see. But the army outside was rotting. Imagine the scene through the eyes of a Genoese guard on the wall. For months, you have watched the Mongols attack. You have seen their arrows and their siege engines. But now, the attacks have stopped. The enemy camp is quiet, but not peaceful. You see carts piling up with bodies. You hear the wailing of men dying in their tents. The besiegers are being besieged by nature. This brings us to the most infamous moment of the Black Death's history. According to the story, the Mongol Khan, Jani Beg, realized his army was collapsing. He was furious. He could not take the city with swords, so he decided to take it with sickness. He ordered his engineers to load their trebuchets, massive catapults designed to throw heavy stones, with a different kind of ammunition. They loaded the infected corpses of their dead comrades. The arm of the trebuchet swung up. The dead body flew through the air, arching over the stone walls, and crashed into the residential streets of Caffa. Then another, and another. It is a scene of absolute nightmare. It sounds like a modern horror movie, but as students of history and language, we must pause. We must ask, is this true? This brings us to our critical thinking focus, evaluating sources. The primary source for this story is a notary named Gabriele de Mussi. He wrote a famous account called Historia de Morbo, History of the Disease. In his text, he describes the bodies raining down, mountains of dead thrown into the city, poisoning the air and the water. However, there is a catch. Gabriele de Mussi was not in Caffa. He was thousands of miles away, in Piacenza, Italy. He never saw a trebuchet launch a body. He was writing down what he heard from sailors and travelers. In English, we call this hearsay. Hearsay is information received from other people that you cannot substantiate yourself. This forces us to use hedging language. Hedging is the art of being careful with the truth. Notice how I change the sentences below. Strong claim, risky. The Mongols launched bodies into the city. Hedged claim, safe. De Mussi alleges that the Mongols launched bodies. Hedged claim, safe. It is plausible that bodies were thrown, but some historians dispute the impact. Why do historians dispute it? First, consider the biology. The Black Death is primarily spread by the bite of a flea, specifically the Xenopsilla chiopis, or by direct contact with infectious fluids. While a dead body is dangerous, the plague bacteria, Yersinia pestis, requires a living host to remain highly active in the way that causes explosive outbreaks. Fleas leave a body once it turns cold. They look for warm blood. If the bodies thrown over the wall were cold, the fleas would likely have already left them. Second, consider the rat theory. Caffa was a port city. It was full of grain stores. Where there is grain, there are rats. Rats do not respect city walls. Rats can scurry through drainage pipes, they can run under gates. It is highly likely that the infected rats simply walked from the Mongol camp into the city, bypassing the walls entirely. So, why does Demussi tell the story of the catapults? Perhaps because it makes better sense of the tragedy. It is terrifying to think that a tiny, invisible flea can destroy a civilization. It is easier to believe that an evil enemy threw mountains of dead at you. It gives a face to the disaster. It turns a biological accident into a human crime. Let's look at some key vocabulary for this section. 1. Siege. A military operation where enemy forces surround a town or building, cutting off essential supplies to compel the surrender of those inside. 2. Credibility. The quality of being trusted and believed in. We question Demussi's credibility because he wasn't there. 3. To dispute. To argue against, to call into question. Modern scientists dispute the idea that the catapults were the main cause of infection. Whether the bodies flew through the air or the rats ran under the walls, the result was the same. The biological mirror shattered. The infection breached the perimeter. Panic took over Caffa. The merchants realized their stone towers could not save them. The mysterious pestilence was killing people inside the city just as fast as it killed the Mongols outside. They did what humans always do in the face of overwhelming fear. They ran. The Genoese sailors rushed to their ships. They abandoned the city. They left the goods, the silk, and the timber. They wanted only to escape the rain of death. They boarded 12 galleys. They raised the sails. They felt the wind catch the canvas and believed they were leaving the danger behind. But they were wrong. They were not leaving the danger. They were carrying it. They were carrying the fleas in the cargo, the rats in the hold, and the bacteria in their blood. This fleet of 12 ships left the Black Sea, sailed through the narrow Bosphorus Strait, past Constantinople, and entered the Mediterranean. It was a voyage of several weeks. Imagine the atmosphere on those ships. Day by day, more rowers collapsed. Day by day, the crew became smaller. They were a floating hospital, drifting toward Europe. And where was their destination? Messina, Sicily. So we have closed the loop. We now understand why those ships arrived in Messina looking like ghost ships. They were the survivors of the Siege of Caffa, fleeing one nightmare, only to deliver it to another. In the next part, we will watch what happens when the port of Messina tries to contain this imported chaos. We will look at the psychology of denial. When a government realizes a disaster is happening, what is the first thing they do? Usually, they try to lock the doors. We will learn the language of containment and quarantine. We will see how the people of Messina turned against the sailors and how the cascade moved from the docks to the cathedral. The ships have arrived. The rats are ashore. The clock has started ticking for Europe. We return to the docks of Messina. It is late October, 1347. The port authorities have ordered the Genoese ships to leave. This is the first official reaction. Expulsion. Go away. Take the sickness with you. But biology is faster than bureaucracy. The order to expel the ships comes too late. By the time the galleys are pushed back out to sea, the transmission has already occurred. The fleas have hopped. The rats have scurried into the dark corners of the harbor warehouses. Now we see the cascade move from the port to the city streets. Imagine the layout of a medieval city. It is tight. The streets are narrow, often just wide enough for a cart. The houses overhang the alleys, blocking out the sun. people live on top of each other. In 1347, hygiene is not about sterilization. It is about visible cleanliness. You sweep the dirt away. You don't know about the invisible enemies. The first cases appear in the homes of the dock workers. It begins with a headache, a fever, a feeling of intense cold even though the Sicilian sun is warm. Then, the lymph nodes swell. The buboes appear. The family members try to help. A wife wipes the brow of her husband. A mother holds her sick child. In doing so, they expose themselves to the infection, specifically the pneumonic form of the plague, which spreads through the air when the sick cough. This is the biology to society mirror. The way the germ spreads, close contact, exploits the way society is built, tight families, crowded housing. Panic begins to rise. It is not a sudden scream, it is a rising murmur. The people of Messina realize the sickness is not just on the ships, it is here. They turn to their institutions for help. In 1347, the most powerful institution is the church. The Archbishop of Messina, a man probably terrified himself, makes a desperate decision. If the earthly authorities cannot stop the plague, perhaps the heavenly ones can. He organizes a procession. This is a critical moment for language learners. A procession is a formal march of people, usually for a religious or public ceremony. In times of crisis, medieval people gathered together to pray for mercy. Think about the irony here. The biology of the plague thrives on close human contact. The sociology of the cure involves gathering everyone together in a tight crowd. By trying to save themselves with a procession, they are actually supercharging the spread of the disease. They are creating a buffet for the fleas. They are coughing on each other in the packed church. This is a tragic feedback loop. The more people get sick, the more they gather to pray. The more they gather to pray, the more people get sick. In narrative English, we often use irony to describe situations where the result is the opposite of what was intended. Ironically, their attempt to stop the plague only accelerated it. In a tragic twist, the sanctuary became a trap. During this time, the people of Messina also turned their anger outward. They remember the Genoese ships, the other. Fear often seeks a target. The citizens break into the Genoese quarters. They might have shouted, "You brought this!" There are reports of violence, of locals attacking anyone who looked like they came from the ships. The city begins to fracture. Neighbors look at neighbors with suspicion. Is he coughing? Is she looking pale? The bonds of community, trust, shared meals, conversation, begin to snap. This is the social death that precedes the biological death. Let's pause on the vocabulary of crisis response. 1. To contain. To keep something harmful within limits. 2. To flee. To run away from a place or situation of danger. Past tense. Fled. Thousands fled the city as the death toll rose. 3. Sanctuary. A place of refuge or safety, often a holy place. The cathedral offered no sanctuary from the disease. By November 1347, Messina is collapsing. The chronicler Michael of Piazza writes that fathers abandoned their sick sons, lawyers refused to come to make wills, friars refused to enter the homes of the dying to give the last rites. This is the ultimate horror for a medieval person. To die without confession, meaning your soul might be lost forever. The system of Messina, legal, religious, familial, has broken down. Those who can still walk make the same decision the Genoese sailors made in Caffa. They flee. They pack their carts, they take their families, they leave the city gates, heading for the countryside of Sicily. They head for the city of Catania. They head for the villages in the hills. We are safe now, they think. We have left the city of death. But just like the sailors, they are wrong. They are carrying the hitchhikers. The fleas are in the blankets. The bacteria is incubating in their blood. Messina was the amplifier. It took the spark from Caffa and turned it into a fire. Now, the refugees from Messina are about to become the sparks that set all of Sicily, and then all of Italy, ablaze. In the next part, we will follow these refugees to the city of Catania. We will see a different reaction there. Catania does not welcome them. Catania knows what is happening in Messina. We will learn the language of rejection and stigma. We will see how fear builds walls between cities, and how the Black Death officially begins its march up the Italian boot. The gateway is open. The monster is through. The road from Messina to Catania is about 60 miles, 100 kilometers. It winds along the eastern coast of Sicily, with the volcano Mount Etna looming in the distance. It is November 1347. The road is filled with refugees. They are the survivors of Messina. They are wealthy merchants on horses, poor laborers on foot, mothers carrying babies. They are exhausted. They are traumatized. And they are hopeful. They believe that if they can just reach the next city, Catania, they will be safe. But news travels faster than refugees. Word has already reached Catania. "Messina is fallen," the messengers say. "A plague is eating the city." When the refugees arrive at the gates of Catania, they do not find open arms. They find closed doors. The authorities of Catania have heard the stories of the black swellings and the sudden death. They are terrified. This is a new phase in the disaster: social rejection. The people of Messina are no longer seen as fellow Sicilians. They are seen as vectors of disease. A vector is an organism, or in this case, a person, that transmits a disease or parasite from one animal or plant to another. The Catanians refuse to let the Messinese enter the city. They shout from the walls, "Go away! You are cursed!" Imagine the despair of the refugees. They have fled one hell, only to be locked out of heaven. They are forced to camp outside the walls, in the fields and ditches. But here, the accidental twist happens again. The twist that proves you cannot fight biology with city walls alone. While the guards are watching the humans, they are ignoring the animals. The refugees have carts. The carts have grain and supplies. And hiding in the supplies are the black rats. The rats do not wait for permission to enter Catania. They slip through the drainage grates. They run through the grass. And the refugees themselves, they are desperate. Some of them have friends or family inside. Perhaps a bribe is paid to a guard. Perhaps a side gate is left unlocked for a moment. The patriarch of Catania, a religious leader, tries to intervene. He allows some of the sick to be treated. He tries to show mercy. But mercy, in 1348, is a death sentence. The plague enters Catania. It explodes with the same ferocity as in Messina. The hospitals fill up. The graveyards overflow. The containment has failed again. Now the fear turns into superstition. The people of Catania look for a reason. Why is God punishing us? They decide that the refugees from Messina are not just sick. They are evil. A rumor spreads that the Messinese are poisoning the wells. This is a crucial phrase to learn: scapegoating. To scapegoat someone means to blame them for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others, often to relieve one's own anxiety. The Catanians turn on the Messinese. They demand that no one from Messina be allowed near the city. They even demand that the bodies of the Messinese who died in the hospitals be thrown out of the city, unburied. This is a violation of the deepest cultural taboos. To deny a Christian burial was to deny peace in the afterlife. It shows the depth of the terror. The fear of infection has overridden the fear of God. The cascade widens. From Catania, the plague moves inland. It moves to the villages. It moves to the monasteries. And it jumps the water again. Ships from Sicily, perhaps carrying refugees, perhaps just carrying unaware merchants, sail across the narrow strait to the mainland of Italy. They land in Reggio Calabria. They land in Naples. And most importantly, they land in Genoa. Remember the 12 ships? They were Genoese ships. Some of them managed to sail all the way home to Genoa in northern Italy. The Genoese authorities had heard the news from Sicily. They knew their own ships were bringing death. When the ships arrived at the port of Genoa, the city launched fire arrows. They used catapults to drive their own sailors away. "Do not land here!" The ships, rejected by their own homeland, drifted along the coast of France. They became plague ships in the truest sense, floating vessels of the damned, rejected by every port until they crashed or the crews died completely. But again, it was too late. The contact had been made. The rats had swum ashore. By January 1348, the Black Death has established a beachhead on the mainland of Europe. It is no longer an island problem. It is a continental crisis. We are now standing on the edge of the great outbreak of 1348. The gateway event is over. The door is wide open. In the next part, we will look at Florence. Florence is the city where the Black Death becomes literature. We will meet the writer Giovanni Boccaccio. He will be our guide to the social collapse of the greatest city in Italy. We will move from the gritty ports to the palaces of the rich. We will see how the wealthy tried to hide and how the plague found them anyway. The shadow is lengthening. It is pointing north. We have watched the plague conquer the ports. Now we watch it conquer the heart of culture. It is the spring of 1348. We are in Florence, Italy. Florence is not just a city. It is the financial and artistic capital of the medieval world. It is a city of stone towers, banking families, and immense wealth. If any city had the resources to fight a disaster, it was Florence. They had paved streets, they had sewage regulations, they had doctors. But the biology to society mirror shows us that complexity can be a weakness. Florence was a hub. All roads led there. And so, the plague arrived with the efficiency of a bank transfer. Our guide for this part of the journey is Giovanni Boccaccio. He is a writer, a poet, and a survivor. He witnessed the destruction of his city and wrote the masterpiece, The Decameron. Boccaccio gives us the most vivid, terrifying description of the symptoms. He writes about tumors in the groin or armpits, some growing as large as a common apple, others as an egg. He calls them gavoccioli. But Boccaccio doesn't just describe the body, he describes the behavior. He noticed that the city split into distinct psychological groups. This is a perfect opportunity to learn vocabulary about coping mechanisms. Group 1. The isolators. These people believed that moderation and isolation would save them. They locked themselves in their houses. They ate only the finest food and drank the best wine, but in moderation. They refused to speak about the sickness. They tried to create a bubble of normalcy. Group 2. The hedonists. These people believed the opposite. If we are going to die, they thought, let us enjoy our last days. They drank heavily. They sang in the streets. They broke into the houses of the dead and drank their wine. They treated the apocalypse as a party. Group 3. The moderates. They didn't lock themselves up, but they didn't party. They walked around holding flowers and herbs to their noses. They believed the bad air, miasma, caused the disease, and the scent of flowers would protect them. Group 4. The abandoners. This is the group that shocked Boccaccio the most. These were the people who deserted their friends, their parents, and even their children. Brother was forsaken by brother, he wrote. The social contract was torn apart by the survival instinct. The death toll in Florence was catastrophic. Historians estimate that up to 50% or even 60% of the city's population died in a few months. Imagine your own city. Imagine half the people vanishing. The cascade here affects the infrastructure. With so many dead, there were no gravediggers. The traditional funeral rites, the processions, the candles, the weeping, stopped. There was no time. They began digging trenches. Boccaccio describes how bodies were piled in these trenches, like merchandise in the hold of a ship. Layer of body, layer of dirt. Layer of body, layer of dirt. We call these mass graves. This is a moment of desensitization. To become desensitized means to stop feeling shock or distress at a situation because you have been exposed to it so much. In fact, the bells eventually stopped ringing. There were too many deaths to mark each one. The city fell into a heavy, sick silence, broken only by the cry, "Bring out your dead!" But amidst this horror, a strange economic shift began to happen. This is the paradox of the plague. The rich were dying. The poor were dying. But the stuff, the gold, the houses, the clothes, the tools, remained. Suddenly, a peasant who had nothing could walk into an empty palace and sleep in a silk bed. A laborer who used to beg for work could now demand high wages, because there was no one else left to do the job. The value of labor skyrocketed. The value of land plummeted, because there was no one to farm it. This is the beginning of the end of feudalism. Feudalism was the system where peasants were tied to the land and served a lord. But you cannot enforce feudalism when half the peasants are dead. The survivors had leverage. They had power. This is a chain reaction that will take decades to fully play out. But it starts here, in the silence of Florence. The plague killed the people, but it liberated the survivors. Boccaccio fled Florence. He went to the countryside to write his stories. He tried to preserve the culture of Italy while the cities burned. But the plague did not stop at the Alps. It ignored the mountains just as it ignored the walls of Caffa. It moved north. It moved toward France. It moved toward the English Channel. In the next part, we will cross the water again. We will go to England. We will land in Weymouth in the summer of 1348. We will see how the English watched the horror approaching from across the sea, how they prayed it wouldn't come, and how, once again, a single ship brought the silence to a new land. The London Gritty Chronicles are about to come home. We leave the scorched heat of Italy and travel north, across the Channel, to the green fields of England. It is June 1348. For months, the English had been hearing rumors. They heard that a great mortality was destroying the kingdoms of the East. They heard that France was burning. But England is an island. In the medieval mind, the sea was a wall. They believed the water would protect them. They were hoping against hope. They hoped against hope that the Channel would stop the plague. But the sea is not a wall. It is a highway. The plague did not swim across. It took a ticket. The location is Melcombe Regis, known today as Weymouth, in the county of Dorset. It is a small, significant port on the south coast. It is summer. The weather is unusually wet and warm, perfect conditions for fleas. A ship appears. It is likely a Gascon ship, coming from the English-controlled province of Gascony in France. It is carrying wine. It is carrying fine cloth. The people of Melcombe Regis see a business opportunity. They do not see the end of their world. And this brings us to the biology to society mirror again. The plague follows the trade routes. It follows the money. The ship docks. The sailors mingle with the locals. Perhaps a sailor coughs in a tavern. Perhaps a rat runs down the mooring rope into a grain store. This moment is the English patient zero. Within days, people in Melcombe Regis begin to fall ill. They have the same symptoms Boccaccio described in Florence. The swellings, the black spots, the vomiting of blood. But here, the reaction is one of confusion. The local doctors have never seen this. They consult their books. They look at the stars. They talk about corrupted air or an imbalance of humors. They do not understand that the enemy is biological. The disease moves fast. It breaks out of Melcombe Regis and heads for the nearest major city, Bristol. Bristol was the London of the West. It was crowded, dirty, and rich. It was the perfect incubator. When the plague hit Bristol, the chroniclers say the living could scarce bury the dead. The grass grew in the streets. The silence that fell over Messina and Florence now falls over the bustling English port. The news of Bristol's fall travels east, along the roads, toward London. Imagine being a messenger. You are riding a horse from Bristol to London. You stop at a village. You tell them, Bristol is dead. You drink their ale. You sleep in their inn. And when you leave the next morning, you leave the fleas behind in the straw of your bed. You are the messenger of death, and you don't even know it. This is how the plague traveled, at the speed of a horse or the speed of a river barge. In London, the authorities begin to panic. The Bishop of London, Ralph Stratford, writes a letter to his clergy. He sounds terrified. He urges people to pray, to walk in processions, again the fatal mistake, and to confess their sins. He knows it is coming. This is the psychological hook for the next part of our story. The capital city knows the executioner is on the way. London in 1348 is a city of about 70,000 people. It is a maze of wooden houses, open sewers, and animal slaughterhouses. It is loud, smelly, and vibrant. It is the heart of the kingdom. The people of London look at the gates. They watch the road from the west. They wonder when the first cart will arrive with a sick driver. They don't have to wait long. By late autumn 1348, the plague breaches the walls of London. It is November 1st, 1348, All Hallows Day. We are standing at the gates of London. The sky is grey, the air is damp, and the River Thames is a dark ribbon cutting through the city. London in 1348 was a city of triumph. King Edward III had just returned from France with glorious victories. The English had won the Battle of Crécy. They had captured Calais. The mood should have been electric with pride. There were plans for jousts, for feasts, for the founding of a new order of chivalry, the Order of the Garter. But the Black Death does not care about military victories. It does not care about chivalry. The plague enters London not through a siege, but through the daily traffic of carts and barges. It creeps into the crowded lanes of the city. London was a perfect trap. The streets were narrow and filled with animal waste. The houses were timber and plaster, packed so tightly that you could shake hands with your neighbor from the upper windows. There was no running water. There were no sewers. It was a buffet for the rats. The infection moves from the docks at the Thames into the heart of the city. And here we see the collision of royal protocol and survival instinct. King Edward III is a warrior king. He is not a man easily frightened. But he receives news that shakes him to his core. His own daughter, Princess Joan, had been traveling to Spain to be married. She was in Bordeaux, France. She caught the plague, and she died. This is the moment the king realizes that royalty is no shield against biology. The divine right of kings, the idea that God specially protects the monarch, is challenged by a bacteria. Edward III faces a choice. Does he stay in his capital and lead his people through the sickness? Or does he protect the government by leaving? He chooses to leave. This is not cowardice, it is pragmatism. Edward cancels the parliament. He cancels the great tournaments. He takes his court and moves to his country estates, to Windsor and Woodstock. He runs from the density of London to the open air of the countryside. He leaves London to face the winter alone. Imagine the atmosphere of London in December 1348. It is the Christmas season. Usually this is a time of feasting, of burning the Yule log, of games and markets. But this year, the markets are empty. The only carts on the streets are the ones carrying bodies. The biology to society mirror shatters the festive spirit. You cannot gather for Mass because the churches are contagion zones. You cannot visit your family because your family might kill you. The chroniclers tell us that there was no one to hear confessions. The priests were dying as fast as the parishioners. The bonds of religion, which held medieval society together, were dissolving. The Bishop of London, Ralph Stratford, sees that the churchyards are full. St. Paul's Cathedral is overwhelmed. He buys a piece of land outside the city walls, in a place called No Man's Land. He consecrates it as a massive emergency cemetery. Today, we know this area as East Smithfield. Archaeologists have excavated this site. They found the skeletons stacked in neat rows. This tells us something incredible about the Londoners of 1348. Even in the apocalypse, they tried to maintain order. They didn't just dump the bodies in a pit like they did in other cities. They dug trenches. They laid the bodies out with respect, facing east towards Jerusalem, waiting for the resurrection. This is a powerful example of human resilience. But as Christmas approaches, the weather turns cold. The wet winter makes the pneumonic plague, the kind that spreads by coughing, even deadlier. The city falls into a grim silence. By the start of 1349, London is a ghost town. The king is gone. The parliament is suspended. The courts of law are closed. The only authority left is the mayor and the alderman, trying to keep the peace in a city where the only law is death. The cascade has reached the very top of English society. The machinery of the state has stopped. But what happens when the machinery stops? Who feeds the city? Who bakes the bread? In the next part, we will look at the aftermath. We will see what happens when the plague finally burns itself out. We will see a world turned upside down. We will learn about the statute of laborers. This is a law the king passed to try to force the peasants back to work. It was a desperate attempt to turn back the clock. Did it work? Or did the Black Death change the economy forever? We are moving from the horror of the event to the revolution of the consequences. The winter of 1348 turns into the spring of 1349. In London, the bells begin to ring again, tentatively. The death carts appear less frequently. The great mortality has burned through the fuel of the city, the people. And now, the fire is dying down. The survivors emerge from their homes. They blink in the sunlight. They look around. What they see is a world that looks the same, but is fundamentally different. The buildings are still standing. St. Paul's Cathedral still dominates the skyline. The Thames still flows. But the silence is deafening. In some parishes of London, half the congregation is gone. In the countryside, entire villages stand empty. The doors flapping in the wind, the hearths cold. This brings us to the biology to society mirror in its most potent form, economics. Biology dictated that fewer people were alive. Society dictated that the work still needed to be done. Imagine you are a surviving landowner, a lord or a knight. You have vast fields of wheat that need to be harvested. You have sheep that need to be sheared. Before the plague, you could snap your fingers and a dozen peasants would beg for the work. You paid them pennies. They had no choice. But now, you snap your fingers and no one comes. You ride to the village. You find 3 men where there used to be 30. "Come harvest my wheat," you say. And for the first time in history, the peasant looks at the Lord and says, "Make me an offer." This is the birth of labor leverage. The surviving workers realized their value had doubled, tripled, even quadrupled. They demanded better food, better pay, and shorter hours. If a lord refused, they simply walked to the next manor, where a desperate lord would pay anything to save his harvest. This was the golden age of the English laborer. They ate meat instead of gruel. They wore finer clothes, often the clothes of the dead masters. But the ruling class did not accept this quietly. King Edward III and his parliament were terrified. They saw this shift not as market economics, but as a violation of God's order. In their minds, peasants were born to serve, not to negotiate. So, in 1349, and reinforced in 1351, the king played his hand. He issued the Ordinance of Labourers, which later became the Statute of Labourers. This is a critical moment for legal English. The law was brutal. It tried to freeze time. It stated that all able-bodied men and women under the age of 60 must work. And crucially, it stated that they must work for the same wages they received in 1346, before the plague. It also made it a crime for lords to pay more. It tried to ban competition. "Fix prices," the king commanded. "Stop the inflation." But here is the lesson the king learned the hard way. You cannot legislate against supply and demand. The law failed spectacularly. Why? Because the lords were desperate too. If a lord followed the king's law, his crops would rot in the field. Because no one would work for 1346 wages. So, the lords broke the law. They paid the higher wages in secret. They offered bonuses of food and ale. The cascade of the plague had broken the feudal system. The old bonds of loyalty were replaced by the cold, hard cash of a wage economy. The Statute of Labourers created a deep, simmering anger. The peasants felt the king was trying to steal their new prosperity. The lords felt the peasants were greedy and rebellious. The tension was building. It was a pressure cooker. The lid had been slammed down on a boiling pot. This tension would simmer for 30 years. Eventually exploding in the peasants' revolt of 1381, where the mob would storm London and behead the Archbishop of Canterbury. For now, let's look at the psychological shift in the survivors. They had seen death. They had seen the priests die, the rich die, the poor die. They realized that death was the great equalizer. This changed the art and culture of England. We see the rise of the danse macabre, the dance of death. Paintings on church walls showing skeletons dancing with kings, bishops, and peasants. The message was clear. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. But it wasn't just depressing, it was also liberating. If death is coming for everyone, why follow the rules? Why listen to a king who couldn't save you? The Black Death created a generation of skeptics. It planted the seeds of the Reformation. It planted the seeds of modern labor rights. We are nearing the end of our journey. We have seen the ships arrive in Messina. We have seen the bodies in Caffa. We have seen the ghost town of London. In the next part, we will look at the science. We have told the story through the eyes of medieval people who didn't understand what was happening. But now, we must put on our modern lab coats. What really happened? Was it just rats? We will look at the modern DNA evidence from the plague pits of London. We will discuss the controversy of the gerbils versus rats theory. We will use the language of epidemiology and genetics. We will find out that the killer has a name, Yersinia pestis. And we will see that it hasn't gone away. We have walked through the streets of 1348. We have smelled the fear and heard the silence. Now we must step out of the medieval mind and into the modern laboratory. We are going to solve the cold case. For centuries, historians and scientists argued. Was it really the bubonic plague? Some said it moved too fast. Some said the symptoms didn't match modern plague. Was it Ebola? Was it anthrax? The answer was hiding in the most durable part of the human body, the teeth. In the 1980s, and again in 2011, archaeologists returned to the East Smithfield Cemetery in London, the same no man's land. Consecrated by Bishop Ralph Stratford in our earlier story. They excavated the skeletons. They took the teeth of the victims to a sterile lab. Inside the pulp of a tooth, the blood supply is protected. It is a biological time capsule. If the person died with bacteria in their blood, the DNA of that bacteria is still there, waiting. In 2011, scientists successfully sequenced the entire genome of the Black Death. This is a key word, genome. The verdict was clear. The killer was, without a doubt, Yersinia pestis. But it was a specific ancestral strain. It was the grandmother of all modern plagues, and it was incredibly lethal. Here is the biology of the killer. Yersinia pestis is a bacterium that lives in the gut of a flea, specifically the Xenopsilla chiopis, rat flea. When the flea drinks the blood of an infected rat, the bacteria multiply inside the flea's stomach. They multiply so fast that they form a biofilm, a solid plug that blocks the flea's throat. The flea begins to starve. It tries to drink more blood. It jumps onto a human and bites, but because its throat is blocked, it cannot swallow. Instead, it vomits the bacteria-filled blood back into the human's wound. The flea is not evil. It is just hungry and sick. But this biological accident killed 50 million people. However, the science of the skeleton has opened a new debate. This is where we must use our hedging language again. The rat controversy. For a long time, we blamed the black rat, Rattus rattus. We believed rats were everywhere in London, living in the thatch roofs, spreading the fleas. But recent mathematical models suggest that for the plague to spread as fast as it did in 1348, rats alone might not be the answer. If it were just rats, the spread would be slower. Some scientists now propose a human-to-human ectoparasite theory. This suggests that the fleas and body lice living on humans, in our clothes and hair, transmitted the disease directly, without needing rats as a middleman. Other scientists look further east. They look at climate data from tree rings in Asia. They found that wet springs and warm summers in Central Asia caused the population of gerbils and marmots to explode. When the climate cooled, these rodents died, forcing their fleas onto camels and traders on the Silk Road. So perhaps the invader wasn't just a rat on a ship. It was a climate event thousands of miles away that triggered a biological domino effect. The DNA evidence from London also revealed something chilling about evolution. The plague didn't disappear after 1350. It stayed. It evolved. It became the second pandemic, returning every few decades for centuries, like the Great Plague of London in 1665. But here is the twist. We evolved too. Some geneticists believe that the survivors of the Black Death, the people who didn't die in 1348, had a specific genetic mutation that protected them. They passed this mutation down to their children, down to us. If you are of European descent, you might carry a gene that helped your ancestor survive the Great Mortality. The history is literally written in your blood. So, the science confirms the horror of the chronicles. It confirms the buboes. It confirms the speed. But it also adds a layer of complexity. It wasn't just bad air or God's wrath. It was a precise, microscopic mechanism that exploited the trade routes of a booming world. The science mirror reflects a terrifying truth. The more connected we are, the more vulnerable we are. In the final part, Part 10, we will zoom out. We will look at the legacy. How did the Black Death change the English language itself? How did it change religion? How did it pave the way for the Renaissance? We will finish our reconstruction. The ships have docked. The dead are buried. The science is settled. Now we must ask, what kind of world rose from the ashes? The year is 1350. The Great Wave has passed. The waters of the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and the Thames are calm again. But the world has changed. The Great Mortality, as they called it, killed between 30% and 60% of Europe's population. It is a number so big that it becomes meaningless. So let's look at the specific, tangible changes. Let's look at the legacy. The first legacy is the sound of the streets. Before 1348, the language of power in England was French. The language of the church and the law was Latin. English, the language we are speaking now, was the language of the peasants. It was considered low, gritty, and unrefined. But the plague was an equal opportunity killer. It killed the French-speaking aristocracy. It killed the Latin-speaking priests and teachers. When the schools reopened, there were no teachers left to teach French. When the courts reopened, there were fewer lawyers who knew the complex Latin procedures. So, out of necessity, English began to rise. In 1362, just over a decade after the plague, Parliament passed the Statute of Pleading. It stated that all court proceedings must be conducted in English because the French tongue is much unknown in the said realm. This is a massive cultural shift. The biology of the plague, killing the elite, forced a sociological change, the rise of the vernacular. Without the Black Death, Geoffrey Chaucer might not have written the Canterbury Tales in English. Shakespeare might have written in French. The language you are learning today is, in part, a survivor of the pestilence. The second legacy is inside the mind. The church had failed. The prayers did not stop the swellings. The processions only spread the disease. The priests ran away or died. The survivors looked at the institution of the church with a new, skeptical eye. They began to ask, why do I need a priest to talk to God? The priest is dead. This doubt planted the seeds of the Reformation. It empowered movements like the Lollards in England, who demanded a Bible in English. It shifted the focus from the institution to the individual. And finally, the social mobility. We talked about the Statute of Laborers in Part 8. The king tried to stop the peasants from demanding higher wages. He failed. The golden age of the laborer really did happen. Diet improved. People ate more meat and cheese. They wore better clothes. The old feudal system, where a serf was tied to the land like a tree, was hacked away at the roots. The survivor of 1350 was richer, more skeptical, and more independent than the peasant of 1340. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of the Black Death. It was the worst disaster in human history, yet it paved the way for the modern world. It broke the rigid structures of the Middle Ages. It forced innovation in medicine. Quarantine boards were invented. It forced innovation in labor, machines to replace lost workers. It was the reset button. So, let us return one last time to the harbor of Messina, where we started. Stand on the dock. Look at the horizon. The 12 Genoese galleys are long gone. The wood has rotted. The bones of the sailors have turned to dust. But the world they unleashed is the world we live in. A world of global trade. A world where a biological spark in one continent can set fire to another. A world where fear travels as fast as a ship, or a plane, or an internet connection. The Gateway event of 1347 teaches us one final lesson: resilience. Humanity did not end. We adapted. We buried the dead, we argued about the wages, we translated the Bible, and we kept moving. We are the descendants of the survivors. We carry their genes, and we speak their language. Thank you for joining me on this reconstruction of the Great Mortality. We have traveled from the siege towers of Caffa to the churchyards of London. We have learned the language of contagion, hedging, and consequence. This has been the London Gritty Chronicles. Keep your eyes on the horizon. You never know what ship is coming next. I'm your host. Class dismissed.